Hello and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 983rd New Social Environment. I'm Eleanor, a programs associate here at the Rail, and today I have the huge pleasure and privilege of being your MC for a conversation featuring Billy McEntee and Eulàlia Comas. And I will now introduce our wonderful guest and host. Billy McEntee is a Brooklyn-based writer. He's the theater editor at the Brooklyn Rail and has contributed to publications including The Washington Post, Playbill, and Vanity Fair. He's made plays through a Queen's Arts Council grant and at the Brick Theater, where he co-created piece, Geraldine Realigned, will return this May. His short film, Lindsay Lindsey Lyndsey, premiered in 2022. And Eulàlia Comas is a multidisciplinary theater artist and educator based in Brooklyn, with roots in Barcelona and Pennsylvania's Susquehanna Valley. She is a director, designer, writer, and steward of storytelling processes. Eulàlia's work or their performing body has been presented or developed at River Stage Theater Company, the Performing Garage, La Mama Galleria, and elsewhere. Eulàlia and Billy, thank you so much for being here on the NSE today, and I'm so thrilled to pass it over to you, Eulàlia, to get started.
Thank you so much, Eleanor, and thank you to the rest of the team at the Brooklyn Rail. That's the first time I've ever had my bio read in a public forum, so it's kind of nice to hear. But I am super excited to be here with you, Billy, and I feel like we should contextualize just a little bit, not hide the ways in which we know each other from the folks in the room. So in addition to both being independent writers and theater artists, Billy and I both collaborate through a newer digital platform called Staff Picks, which this conversation may lead us in a direction there, but the short version of it is that Staff Picks is a website and social media platforms that support shorter run shows that don't necessarily find space in larger publications. And I actually wrote a staff pick for Billy's show, The Voices in Your Head, which is what we're here to talk about today, which led to the two of us ending up in this room together, although we've been in lots of rooms together over the past several months. Yeah. What's up, Billy?
I'm doing great. I'm doing great. When Chloe and Eleanor so kindly reached out about this, Eulàlia was the first person who I thought to fold into the conversation for a number of reasons. Per Eulàlia saying that we were doing staff picks together and Eulàlia had come to see the show. Eulàlia also has tethers into the faith-based world, which we might spiral into, and this show is set at a church, so it all felt groovy. So happy to be here with you, Eulàlia.
Yeah, I would love to, in thinking about like how to approach this conversation, I was reflecting on the fact that I was a little bit late for the showing that I arrived at and was the last audience member that people were waiting for. And so I feel like my entrance into the space was a little bit unique, and I want to kind of go over some of those details as a way to bring people into that space. Because one of the things that I think you did so beautifully with the show, you and the whole team, was locate it in its site, which as you sort of alluded to, is this dinner church called St. Lydia's that you're involved with in Gowanus. But before we get to that, do you want to take a moment to read a little excerpt?
Yeah. Eulàlia and I were kind of discovering that it might be hard to talk about a theatrical experience that perhaps most people here have not experienced. And I guess the short version of it, and to give away a little bit of a spoiler, which is helpful for the conversation moving forward, it is a support group for people who lost loved ones to embarrassing deaths. So it is a safe space where these people can laugh about their deaths and grieve in a way that feels unique to them. And so hopefully to tee that up a little bit more, and then Eulàlia, I'm sure, will discuss her experience with it. I'm going to read one of the opening segments of the show, which is delivered by Gwen, played by Vanessa Kai, who is the founder and facilitator of the group. This immediately follows the first monologue given by Regina, a kind of vivacious va-va-voom member of the support group whose cheese addict husband died by choking on Gruyere after a year of having given up lactose. So, and I will deliver this much more poorly compared to the amazing Lortel nominee Vanessa Kai, but you will get the text, which will hopefully be illuminating. And that actually, if we can pause here, Eleanor, that at the head in the sweater is Vanessa Kai, and you're getting a sense of kind of the intimacy of the piece, perhaps already where actors and audience congregate together. So without further ado, thank you. Hard to wait a week for that one, Regina, but worth it. I've been thinking about how much we need to hear each other's laughter. I'm reading David Sloan Wilson. Is anyone familiar? Evolutionary biologist. He co-wrote a paper, The Evolution and Functions of Laughter and Humor, a synthetic approach. Wilson says people, our bodies, on a Darwinian level, use laughter to form bonds. It's a key part of community building and establishing norms. So in ancient tribes, members likely laughed at similar social cues to establish rules. Our bodies need laughter for evolution, which means, okay, we need laughter to repopulate. Like, who is my person? Who gets my humor and will share my values? Who am I going to make a baby with, you know? So laughing can be like this sexual lighthouse, but it's also for community. So yes, that is the little monologue.
I love that so much, and I'm like instantly brought back into. I was sitting right next to Vanessa Kai when I saw the show, or maybe 2 seats over. No, I think I was right next to her, and it was just like so delicious to get to be that close, not just to her, but to all the performers and the other audience members too. But hearing you read that again, sort of in this more isolated context, we're not at the show, we're not in the scene. I'm reminded of something. This is a totally unscientific citation. I don't remember where I read this. If anyone wants to fact check me, please feel free to do so. But I read somewhere that the experience of awkwardness, social awkwardness, has a very similar potential evolutionary origin, that it's a social communicator that I don't know what you need me to do in this context, but I'm willing to be accommodating and I want to do the thing that's expected. I just don't know what it is. And that is like similarly a type of cooperation, I guess, in evolution. Does that?
Yeah, it's so dynamic, and it's something that awkwardness, humor, tension, they're all in relationship to the people who are around us. And so the play to me afforded an opportunity to get people as close as you can together in a space and hopefully let those strange little tugs that are a part of evolution, but I don't have as somebody who's not a scientist, I don't have the vocabulary for, and yet they are so elemental to why we come together and form bonds.
And I think to add on to that, thinking really nerdy dramaturgically about the structure of this theatrical event, one of the most palpable feelings or desires I noticed in myself when I was watching it was this sort of question of, am I being teased? Am I going to get to know what these embarrassing stories are for each character? Do I deserve to know? What direction is the play going to bring me in? And so I think that those questions that I'm forced to ask myself as the audience member throughout really inflects the entire experience. I'm sort of curious to what extent those conversations about when the audience learns what from who, how much of that was populating the rehearsal room?
Yeah, that's a really good question. The script was 90% finalized by the time we began rehearsals, which we had 3 rehearsals in December and 5 in January. And then we were off to the races. We're about halfway through our run right now. I think what I'm thinking of, Laya, is it was a little bit of a puzzle. What the people in this room right now, the Rail folks, hello to everybody. You're learning right here for sake of conversation that it is a support group for people who lost loved ones from an embarrassing death. But the audience walking in the door, if they've read the blurb or talked to a friend, they only know that it is a support group for people who share a bizarre bond. So it's a little bit of dangling a carrot to get people in the door and to maybe learn more and support groups and being in one as so we have Jahan here, one of our actors, and the people on the sides of her are just audience members who are learning about the show as it goes. And it felt like math. It felt like Regina's opening monologue about her cheese-addicted husband choking on Gruyere. It felt like for maybe the first 3/4 of her monologue, you're thinking, oh, he's addicted to alcohol. We're in kind of like an AA. Or, oh, she's sexually frustrated because he can't get it up. So maybe it's a group for people who have like difficulty sexually with their partners. And then the punchline is that he chokes on cheese and died. So that's like the first tip, I guess, that there's a strangeness to the sensibility in the room and why these people are gathered. And then as people's stories unfold, perhaps it becomes a little bit clearer. I like theater and performance where I know that the play is 3 steps ahead of me, but hopefully there's trust in the performance itself that I'm eventually going to get there. It embraces an active listening that I like, and that feels very palpable when people are sitting in the space together. So it is a little bit of math, both with the figuring out the puzzle of it and how it unlocks, and also the way the group kind of devolves and reaches a place of sadness, because this is at the end of the day loss and grief, even though it's blanketed in humor. So getting kind of the humor from the front, learning what it is, and then finding like the sadness that's still underneath it. And one thing, oh, just because I really like this photo, one thing I want to just highlight about Hanji Chow, the photographer, who mostly does theater photography. And if we maybe think of a more traditional form of theater photography, a proscenium creates a very nice frame for a photographer. You're able to capture what's going on the stage via that box. And obviously in a site-specific environment like this where people are sitting in a circle, you aren't afforded that same frame. So Hanji had the idea that the audience members' shoulders would kind of become the frames, that he would shoot from behind to frame the performers and get a sense of the very alive experience that is sitting in the circle. I just saw Christian's lovely face here, the actor who plays Caleb, and thought of that. Laya, sorry, that was probably an overwrought response to your ansor, your question.
No, that I love to shut up. The I'd love to hear that about the sort of decisions that went into the photography, and I feel like it's also reflected in the, you know, when I was sitting in the circle, I was very aware of this sort of slippage between like at the start of the show, I don't really have a sense of who's going to be. I know some people are performers and some people are probably audience members, and it's sort of this game of who's is the person next to me gonna do some weird thing to me, or are they in this ride as somebody working from ground zero in the same way that I am, or square one, I mean to say. But yeah, and so watching it, being in the room, you're also bracketed by these other sort of unfamiliar bodies, but that are shaping the frame that you're seeing the play through. And that was another really interesting element of it, was the you know, I feel like, and this is where maybe an area where we could potentially give away more than we want to. So Billy, I'll defer to you. If anything is, you know, feel free to stop me in my tracks. But one of the things I found really enjoyable was kind of watching the politics, the internal politics of the group, and who gets to decide who's involved and what constitutes as an experience aligned enough with the experiences of the other members of the group to merit membership. And I feel like that brought up this whole other sort of can of worms with I feel like the play was constantly looking at the same questions from two different vantage points through the eyes of the various characters, and in this design of the room, all looking at each other, we were feeling that in an embodied way as well.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think it's necessarily giving anything away, but how people define embarrassing becomes like, I would say 80% of the play is nodding towards something like a verisimilitude. You're just sitting in this group and it's all playing out, and there's not really a lot of tension. It's just kind of, you're kind of voyeuristically observing this support group. And then when it finally gets named that it's a group for people with embarrassing losses because somebody walks in uninvited and thinks they have an embarrassing story, but Gwen, the leader, does not believe so, which kind of shows the tears in the group and who maybe thinks it is one and isn't, hopefully in a way that doesn't feel like, now it feels like you're watching a drama, but you're just watching how this group is facing itself. Because I do think what Sandra, the character who perhaps has the bleakest story, and hers, the source of her death isn't even shared, it's just kind of left to the imagination. But embarrassing is not synonymous with funny. And the etymology nerd in me wants to just like share, like I was like, because initially the play went through a couple of titles. First, it was called The Psalmists because it set at a church, St. Lydia's, which I attend. And I thought there was something about all of these people in a space together, creating stories that were in some way holy. But psalmist felt maybe a little, I don't know, like pretentious. And also a psalm refers to music, and there's not really music in this per se. Jody, you're correct, just because I saw your comment. The audience comes into the circle not totally knowing who a performer is and who an audience member is. They're just kind of seated there. And then the title after the psalmist was something like, I forget, like Mortis Incomodo or something like that, like embarrassing deaths in Latin. But incomodo felt like it was more similar to like uncomfortable. And then I went down this entire rabbit hole of like, well, what does embarrassing even mean? And because it seemed integral to why these characters were disagreeing. And this is maybe a little too nerdy and superfluous, but I'll just like, some fun things that I learned along the way is like, I've always known that embarazado is pregnant in Spanish, but it sounds like a cognate for embarrassing, even though it is not. But both have embar as their prefix, and meaning kind of like to hinder or to like delay or make somebody incapable to do something, which is what embarrassing can do to somebody else. And as I was learning with regard to Spanish, embarazado, it basically turns out to be a bit of a misogynist word. This is just me geeking out, that impeding as in cock blocking, so to speak, that it's like you cannot have sex with this woman or this person because you cannot impregnate them. So it's just funny the way that even like language like that can be strange and misogynist in its way. Anyway, sorry, Laya, I don't know where I was going with that.
No, that's great. I love etymology and grew up speaking English and Spanish and have made that mistake many times, to laughs and confusion both. Yeah, I feel like this is a great place to sort of pivot maybe towards talking more about the space and St. Lydia's and some of the more, a phrase you said while you were speaking that I wrote down was something like creating stories together that are holy or that are in some way holy. To share with the folks in the room on the back end, I was trying to find some sort of fun, quippy writing or something about like theology of embarrassment or spirituality of embarrassment or something. There, in my cursory searches, I could find no such thing. So if anyone does know about that, please send it our way because I would love to learn about it. But this play is set in a support group in a religious space, and it literally takes place in a religious space, and it's a space that you have an intimate relationship with, Billy. And I imagine that it probably lived really early in your head as a place for this play to take place in. But did you write it specifically with St. Lydia's in mind? What was the process bringing you to that area? Yeah, over to you.
Yeah, I did write it from the get-go specifically with St. Lydia's in mind. St. Lydia's is a progressive and LGBTQ affirming dinner church in Gowanus, Brooklyn at 304 Bond Street. It's been around for a little over, well, we're coming up on 15 years. And it was founded by Pastor Emily Scott. It is technically a Lutheran home for faith, and we share the scripture together over a meal in the way that the early traveling apostles would, going into people's homes and sharing stories. So this might be a stretch, but it's kind of like Quakers with food. I kind of think of it in that way because there's like a sharing of stories and it's done over a meal. And then we clean up together, we hear the holy word, and we go home. And it's a very special place. As you can see, it's got this lovely like brick wall. It's a storefront, a lot of natural light, a very, very special home for faith, especially for people who maybe struggled with houses of faith growing up. There are no pews. We sit at tables. And the fact that St. Lydia's is a home of intergenerational congregants, and where in tiny moments of quiet and prayer, you can hear the neighbor above you vacuuming because somebody lives above a storefront. A lot of that just unlocked to me moments that I thought could be explored in a space. So obviously, when you're doing site-specific theater, you are specifically choosing a site. And St. Lydia's also happens to host support groups unto themselves. So on Tuesdays, we are dark because St. Lydia's is hosting Marijuana Anonymous. And then our fictional support group swoops in on most of the other days. So yeah, it felt like this was an opportunity. I like theater that feels more like an experience than a play, or more like an event than a capital P play. And St. Lydia's just felt like it offered a place where actors who I love, having written 6 of the 8 roles for people who I directly knew, to come together to mosh people from age 22 to 63 of different backgrounds in this space in an organic way that a support group allows.
It's I also share your preference for like events over capital P plays. And for me, part of the reason that I do like that is because it allows you the opportunity to decide when the theatrical bleeds in a little bit more. And I think that we do see some like sparse moments of that in the voices in your head. Like idiomatically, we sort of enter this more stylized space at various points, and either in the context of this piece or more generally, like whether it's in your the work you make or the work you see, like what are the how do you negotiate / manage for yourself the line between event and play? Like, and it's constantly moving, I think, but I'm curious to hear your response to that.
Wow, that's a really great question. I don't know. I don't know if I have an immediate or thought out answer for that, but I love considering where you blur event and play. I guess just like what I'll say is I knew that the written version of this was intended for St. Lydia's as a home for it, as like the presenting venue essentially. And everything else followed from there. The ability to use the doors intentionally, the sound of the space intentionally. The chairs that we're sitting in are the church chairs that are used for other rentals, because St. Lydia's also has an active rental calendar. It does events of varying kinds. And to me, like the 2 secret ingredients were the space and the people, because that's essentially all the play is. It's space, people, and text, obviously, but getting a group of 8 actors, again, very much varying in ages and theatrical experience, some with IMDb lists that are longer than a CVS receipt, and some who are kind of new and up and coming. But regardless, just knowing that these were 8 really talented roles bespoke for them individuals, and knowing that they would approach a non-theatrical space without an ego. There's no dressing room, there's no stage lights, there's nowhere to hide. It is a church by all intents and purposes and not a theater. So knowing that they would be able to come in and embrace, hopefully, the magic that I feel that is a place like St. Lydia's, and help us transform it into a theater space. And then it really, I guess the line, Laya, is like the audience coming in. That's when it felt like it became an event, because in rehearsal, we were just like laughing a lot. It is, I think, a very funny, weird little show. But when you have audiences in there, you need to think, well, here's Daphne in the middle, who's Regina, and when is Regina allowed to laugh in this space, even if her neighbor is laughing because she's her own character? And I'm really glad that Ryan Dobrin, our super, super talented director, who, as a plug, is the associate on the Merrily We Roll Along revival on Broadway right now, that he said from the get-go, we need to get people, bodies in this space early, because the performances are going to really change in relationship to the people who are around them. They need to learn the mechanics and the world of this piece with not just actors around them, and make them realize that they are the lead character in this story to the person on their left and right, even though it is an ensemble piece. Jeremy. Yeah. Jeremy, we do, so Debbie, who is in the chat, is St. Lydia's community coordinator and also the stage manager, because who better to be the stage manager for this show than somebody who is intimately aware of the mechanics of St. Lydia's. And so I told Ryan, the director, or it was in the script, that in the middle of somebody's dialogue, vacuuming happens because a character goes upstairs. And Ryan, the director, who had not been to St. Lydia's, was like, are we gonna be able to hear it? How do you pull that off? And I was like, I don't know, but I really think it would be magical if we could. And then Debbie very kindly reached out to the neighbor above and said, we would love to borrow your space for 5 minutes during this time on these show nights to let somebody do vacuuming, and it's gonna create a fun moment. And that neighbor came to the show and enjoyed it. And we get to have that sonic component that grounds it in you're really here. So that was very, very special. And kudos to Debbie for facilitating that.
And it was so funny. That moment was just hilarious.
It's fun.
I am curious, with all of this like stuff that we've been talking about the space and the sort of spiritual dimensions of it. I think with site-specific theater, it's really important always to acknowledge not just the ways in which the site informs the making, but the ways in which the site itself is part of what communicates meaning. And the fact that it is this like storefront, unique sort of kind of church, I think even if you entered the space without an awareness that it was a church, it carries a kind of particular presence that really sort of gives a particular hue to everything. And I don't know to what extent you were involved in, like all of the rehearsals as the writer, as one of the writers, producers, creators, but if you have any insights into how that may have informed the work in the room, I would love to hear about that.
Sorry, Laya, you mean like how the space or the holiness of the space informed the experience in the text?
Yeah, like I think that we're talking about it now from the perspective of entering the space as an audience member, and we've talked about sort of the things the space has allowed for in the construction of the piece. Yeah. But I'm curious more in terms of the conversations about the text and the sort of pulling together of the performances, the ways in which that fed into it.
Yeah. We were rehearsing in the Tank, which is
Uh-huh.
in Midtown Manhattan. Kind of, we were in like the smaller rooms. It's a performance space. They have rehearsal spaces. We were there in December, and then in January we were here, and it was funny. We were in a bigger space, and yet it felt more intimate. And like, okay, so in this photo here, we also did not really have designers for this show because there was no set to design. We just said we can fit 18 people. We're gonna do 18 chairs in a circle plus the actors. And you can kind of see in the upper right these uh, navy blue bows of cloth and like the twinkly lights. And those are just Saint Lydia's lighting elements for, I believe, for Advent for the Christmas season. And the actors were like, "Oh, those are so nice. Can we keep those?" And Debbie was kindly like, "Let's keep them. They're cool." And so it was kind of that all of the actors are wearing their own clothing. They are designed insofar as they are wearing the same costume each night, but without a costume designer. We just kind of said, we think that this is what the character's wearing. Do you have anything in your wardrobe that would kind of match that? And it should feel like you were saying, Laya, like slippery between actor and audience. So it shouldn't feel like you can immediately tell that somebody next to you is in a costume or in the play. Perhaps except for Blake, who is the most outlandish and clownish of characters, who enters with eye mask on because he's a bit of a jaunty homosexual, but behind the scenes fun or not so fun. Those were giving him an eye sty, so he no longer wears those. um, but no, the because I think the piece was just written for St. Lydia's to begin with, it was all more or less infused. We did make the fun choice to call the space St. Lidwina's as opposed to Lydia's, for two reasons. One, it felt like you're entering a theatrical space gently by us calling it Lidwina over Lydia and giving it just like a slight difference. And Saint Lidwina is a real saint. It sounds similar to Lydia, and she is the patron saint of chronic pain and ice skating because she had a debilitating ice skating accident at age like 8, I think. And it just felt like for a group about embarrassing deaths, you can't get much closer than somebody who had a bad ice skating accident. And that just felt really fortuitous that it kind of sounded like Lydia as well.
And I did my own Saint Ludwina research, and my educational background is actually in religion, and I've done some writing about like medieval Christian mystics and stuff like that, and there's this common theme among them all that the imperfection of the body becomes this site of divinity, and and I think that like that is so present in this play, right? Not even in a like in a sense of the human body, but the body of the I think I'm using the word body here to mean the wholeness of the event as we've been talking about it, that this thing becomes endowed with a particular kind of divine meaning, sort of holiness, returning to what you said earlier about that what's happening in this space is creating these shared stories that are holy.
Yeah. I mean, I've always found it, as somebody who grew up Catholic and Lidwina is a Catholic saint, and I go back and forth on how I feel about it, but like the fixation on, like you were saying, Laya, like pain as a source of sanctification, especially with like young girls' bodies, it feels really layered and interesting. But I think it does, in a way, there is overlap in these people bringing their own strange pain here in the hope that, not that it has meaning, but that there's like a connection that can be formed over it. And my body sees your body. We're all speaking the same language, hopefully, or they think they are. Yeah, it's like above my my pay grade and my like smarts, but there's something really funky about it.
If Saint Ludwina attended the support group, like how would she take it?
Oh my God. I mean, I don't know. She was canonized, I think, like 300 years after her death,
Mm-hmm.
by Pope Leo the 10th or something like that. I can't remember. And I mean, this poor girl, like she's thought to be one of the earliest recorded cases of MS. She just had this really debilitating disease from her fall, as an ice skater, or like a recreational child ice skating. And yet she lived to age like 53 or something like that, and this is during the era of the bubonic plague. So 53 had to be like really, really old, especially for somebody who had such health ailments. I like to think that Saint Ludwina, the Dutch mystic, would like have a ball with this and enjoy the strangeness that is like these wacky things happen to us, and yet we're still here. We just have to like keep sharing the story. But I don't know. I feel like she wasn't really communicative during a lot of her life, so it's hard to know what would happen. But I hope she would like it. Thank you. That was a really fun question.
She also,
Maya.
yeah, anytime. She also in the one source I read on her, I hope this is not wrong. Uh-oh. But she was the child of a laborer,
Yes.
um and so many of these medieval Catholic mystics came from very typically like either nobility or aristocratic classes. They came from family backgrounds where they were exposed to texts and were able to read, at least to a certain degree, had some amount of literacy, which is partially why they had access to the material resources to leave behind these bodies of work that we can now engage with. And so and many of those women were I think the historical record is a little fuzzy, but didn't necessarily have a specific physically traumatic event or condition in the way that the historical record reflects Saint Ludwina having had. So I think that she, insofar as her presence is part of this play, I think it brings a special or a unique kind of attentiveness to pain than maybe the presence of a different Christian mystic from the same period might have.
Yeah, I agree. And that's why it also felt so important to have the show take place where it does. And really, it just felt like the stars aligned. Like Saint Ludwina just to me was the perfect little nugget of a saint for this. And that it just kind of sounded like Lydia's, and that we were in a church. It felt like it afforded itself that opportunity, whereas support groups happen in all kinds of places. And I think what's exciting is if the show has a future life, it would have to definitely adapt in some level to whatever the restrictions and opportunities of a new space are.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is always a challenge and potentially a gift, I think, with site specific or site responsive work.
Yeah, you just like don't know what a space is going to give you and what you have to work with.
With that in mind, like, and I'm sort of imagining this can maybe bring us in a little bit of a staff picks direction, just to key you into my thought process. But this is, with any site specific work or any experimental work in a found space, like the process of producing that is always going to be different than sort of the production models we're taught and used to and typically work under. You've already mentioned, for example, that you're the stage manager for the project, is, if you said community coordinator or something like that.
Yes, that's correct.
At St. Lydia's, which makes sense. And so you're part of the task of producing this work is looking for the synchronicities, I think, that are already there that can be leaned into. And that's kind of part of how this project of staff picks has emerged out of a need for highlighting some of those overlaps. And so maybe you can speak to kind of both of those sides of it, but in the work of producing these kinds of events and pieces of art that take place outside of standard spaces, standard models, do you have any insights into the process of that, how to support those works, what's needed, what's not currently being supplied?
Yeah, it's so important. And first, I'll just because Chloe is diligently putting links in the chat, I will share that the run for the Voices in Your Head is sold out because, as you can see, it's such a small house, which was not what happened when Chloe first reached out to us. We did have space, but I am putting my personal email in the chat because there is. We have like a hold each night or so for an extra seat. So if anybody happens to be very interested in coming, please just get in touch with me, and we will try our best to get you in there. So I just wanted to say that. And yeah, so Laya and I are friends with Teresa Bucheister, who is the artistic director at the Brick Theater, a really fabulous collaborator, people gatherer, artist. And perhaps it's no secret to Rail readers that arts coverage is always kind of in flux and often on the decline. And for those who follow theater specifically, perhaps you're aware that the Public Theater had last year said it was nixing under the radar its January Festival of International Experimental Works, which then at the last minute was a corpse revived because it is now actually happening. And I don't really know the mechanics of all of that. But all to say, both shows with shorter runs that happen in more obscure places are always battling for existence, and a healthy critical landscape and a healthy journalistic press landscape are vital to their survival and to just like this, to getting the word out there. Because the reality is, I think, and I don't think this is narrow-minded, that unless you directly know somebody involved with this production, there's a good chance that you just wouldn't hear about it, which isn't necessarily a terrible thing, especially if space is so limited. But with staff picks, Laya, Teresa, and I, and a horde of other staff picks pickers, we try and once a week pick out the kind of fringier shows that are happening, short, like runs that are like short on performances but high on rigor. We're putting our names on the line, if you will, and we're saying, hey, we think this is going to be a really cool thing, you should check it out. And that feels important to give people a boost. And as Teresa said at our launch party for staff picks, it's not just press, it's people's visas. It's a lot of artists need press when they're applying for their O1s. They need to be a exceptional candidate, and whatever we can do to kind of buoy that in some way. So that's, I think, maybe what I'll say about staff picks. And then I think you had also maybe asked about like producing, Laya.
Mm-hmm.
I'll admit that producing and writing are not my favorite things to do together because they can just take up a lot of time. But I think just the secret for this one was having really great collaborators. One thing that I'll share, where it's like not every dream can come true when you are producing independent theater, even though this has been a dream come true. But just like one thing that we were not able to realize because of the reality of the space is, at the end, we wanted the actors who come in to they Dance to Gloria by Laura Branigan, the Glee cover version of it, per somebody's embarrassing death tied to it at the end of the show. And I was like, what if they popped out of every single door that St. Lydia's has? Like, we've been using this front door the whole time. It feels like realism. They're coming into this space, but there's two other doors from the basement and the back door. And the neighbor who so kindly lets us use the vacuum upstairs was like, the fire escape to get out there is egress only. It would be unsafe for people in the dark to go out that way. And I was like, safety first makes complete sense. Some dreams you need to put on the wayside. So it's just all about the reality and what's manageable.
Yeah. And working with reality with the mindset that everything's an opportunity to do something with it.
Yeah.
I just want to pick out the phrase you said, healthy critical landscape. I think that I think that this kind of work, that both this and staff picks, is like a perfect case study in that a healthy critical landscape is not just, it's not something that would be nice to have. It's something that directly impacts the livelihood of artists working, and and there's lots of different ways that it can look. It can look like lots of different things.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm assuming that everybody here likes the rail. That's just an assumption I'm going to make, or is familiar. And I'll say that what the rail as a theater writer, because I make my living as a arts journalist and arts and journalism educator for the most part. And what the rail affords for me as the theater editor, which at first, for the first maybe 2 or 3 years that I was in the position, I was just being an editor and fielding pitches and enlisting contributors. And then I guess I hit 30 and I was just a little tired of sending out pitches every single week on, I want to cover this, or like, what do you think? And it was mostly like puff piece feature stories or Q&As, which are great and necessary. But I was having a hard time landing pieces that were not really theater reviews, but more so like a response to a play, and just kind of negotiating for myself what the gentle difference between a review and a response is. And so what I try to do now in my monthly contribution as a writer as well for the Rails theater section is to go see a show that I think is going to be interesting or murky or a little different, and get the blessing of the press rep to publish something before the show opens. I'm sure this is true across artistic medium, but usually in theater, you have to wait until opening night, and then reviews can come out. And I just thought that that was like maybe limiting in the landscape. And so I would ask, could I come see the show and not respond to the physical production? Because I know in previews, a lot of physical things change, but can I just respond to like the intention of the play and what I think it is, building a bridge between piece and audience, and just get to like offer audiences a window into a piece before they read reviews, and give a different lens on it. And I don't think I would get to do something like that at other publications, at least not as easily. And the Rail lets me write more than 800 words, which if people are going to read, God bless, thank you very much. But sometimes I think that that's healthy and great and eye-opening for the experience. So that's just been something that I've been really grateful for the Rail, and to tie it back to Laya's point about the landscape.
And I think I love this idea of sort of speaking to the intention of the play, and or making that the focal point of a response. And I think that for so many people, myself included, like the resources I have access to as a theater artist, as a producer, the only thing I can really materialize is my intention.
Yeah.
And to have anything else evaluated is kind of like trying to divide by zero, I think. And that's not a reality that I think a lot of people may be necessarily aware of.
Yeah. I was trained. I took a class in college with the Boston Globe's theater critic, just happened to teach a semester class, and I serendipitously just like took the class. I like didn't know who he was, which was so foolish. Well, I guess I knew his name, and then he was like, "Oh, hi, my name is Don O'Coin. I'm the theater critic at the Boston Globe." And I was like, "Oh, that's where I know your name from." And he instilled in me something that like I still think about a lot whenever I do anything that maybe looks like criticism, where he always says, what was the intention of the play, and how close did it get to achieving that? And that feels like a really good North Star to me, to have a healthy and rigorous critical landscape.
Great. That's our North Star. What I was getting ready to ask what you feel like is missing from the healthy critical landscape, but I think that maybe answered the question.
Yeah, yeah, I would love to see more criticism that is not necessarily a review. I will say, I worked at Playwrights Horizons for 7 years. It's an off-Broadway theater on 42nd Street. Perhaps folks have been. And during the pandemic, they started something called Almanac, which is essentially Playwrights Horizons' literary magazine. And because, and I worked in the marketing department there, so I was acutely aware of this, because the New York Times had such a iron grip on ticket buyers, excuse me, that like the day after opening, we knew whether a show was going to extend or whether it would be a slog getting people to buy tickets. And it was all predicated on which way the New York Times' compass pointed, the tenor of the review. And that's hard. Like, I don't think a single paper should necessarily have that much power. In London, another big theater town, there are big outlets, but it's not like one is necessarily that much higher than the other. They have like the Evening Standard and the Times and just like other publications. And what Playwrights did to try and, I think, balance out the criticism landscape is they invited artists to come see the performance earlier in previews and publish alongside the timing of reviews their own reactions to the plays. And that was really, I think, a savvy move in just giving a different perspective on how engagement can look with regard to written theater response and criticism. And it just, like, especially if if a Times review was not good, if you still got a love letter from an artist who connected with that costume in the show, I really want to write about. Like, giving people the real estate to specify a reaction in that way is also really healthy. So more stuff like that.
And I also think it all functions as part of the archive, like as this is all part of the conversations we had that led to us starting Staff Picks. Another huge sort of aspect of the mission of Staff Picks is creating, to use your term, the real estate for the archive of these shows that otherwise maybe are archived in a video recording of the performance in the director's Google Drive, but we would otherwise, the show would happen for 3 nights at the Tank, and then nobody would ever know that it existed aside from the people that saw it and the people that worked on it. And I think that that's, of course, part of the power of theater, but in a world where we are constantly being asked to convince people that don't see the power where the power lies, I think that it's that's another way in which all of this sort of like coordinated solicitation of critical media becomes important.
Agree.
I'm aware that it's getting close to 1, and I'm also aware of the fact that I'm not good at endings. So I'm wondering if I should lean into that and pass it back to you, Eleanor.
Wow, thank you so much, Laya and Billy. That conversation was truly such a delight. So much to think about. I'm so grateful. And we've got some audience questions if you'll have them, Billy. And
yeah, 100%.
Awesome. Well, yeah, thanks again, Laya, for your amazing questions. And Billy, it was so great to hear from you. Our first audience question today will be from Jeremy.
Hey, Laya and Billy, thank you so much. I didn't expect your last bit there to just talk about the criticism, criticism and intentions and stuff, which I'm going to like carve out and cut up and just like re-watch that like 100 times. So thank you. All my questions were on the like first half of what you were talking about, which I'm just thrilled to hear about this play, and I've wanted to know, there's kind of a series of small questions, but just like how much am I brought in thinking I'm going to a support group, or am I brought in as knowing I'm going to a play or theatrical production? Like, is this is this is this like slightly like punking people a little bit, which is totally awesome and great too, and like but and then because of it's such an intimate space, and you're around and you're walking that line between fiction and emotion, and death is there, like, and somebody's like, yeah, my father died snorting peanut butter, and like, and then like, and as a participant, I'm like, oh my God, my sister died too. And I'm like, I start losing it. Like, have you like, am I able to like then treat it as a therapeutic session as a participant, or or have you had any kind of breaches of that wall?
I think I have an answer for the second part of your questions, Jeremy, but in terms of like entering the space and what it's like, I would love maybe for Laya to answer that, because I was never really an audience member for this, and Laya, I'm not sure what Laya thought before buying a ticket and coming to this. So I would love to maybe hear what that was like.
Yeah, I knew that it was a support group, but I didn't know what for. And I also knew that, well, in the blurb, or maybe when I purchased the ticket, at some point there was sort of a disclaimer that said, "Wow, this is like an immersive production. There will not be any audience performer, no direct engagement, like physical engagement between the audience and the performers." And as somebody who makes theater and makes the kind of theater that might have that disclaimer in the blurb, like that communicates a fair amount to me about what kind of space I'm going into. So I think like, even though I wasn't part of the project as somebody, I knew maybe a little bit more just based on that disclaimer than I would have otherwise. The other thing that colored my experience was that I arrived just on the brink of being late. And I experienced immense time anxiety. So I was running through in like the cold, and I got there, and then and then this person who I've collaborated with, but only online, was there, and I'd never met them in person. So I walked in and instantly saw a face that I knew, which also created this, I think, that sort of overrid my any questions I would ask about the event itself until it started. So hopefully that's just a nice window into that.
Yeah, I think we, to the best of our abilities, cannot plan for how people will enter the space and how they will interact with it. But we did try as much as possible, just for wellness, to shout from the rooftops. It is a site-specific piece of theater, but there's no audience participation. It is about a support group for people who share a bizarre bond. But we did have like two friends came up to me, and two people who sat next to a character who has a little bit more of a breakdown. And they did say they really felt an urge to like touch this person in some way, but then just kind of thought better of it. But I think that that approximation, I think, feels right. And it's going to be different person to person and how they, I think other people felt maybe uncomfortable in the space, which is fair because audiences are used to perhaps sitting in the dark and not being witnessed, especially when it's something that is about a grief. And, you know, trigger warnings are thorny because everybody can be triggered by immensely different things. So all we really did is in the communication also say, if you have any questions about trigger warnings, just feel free to reach out. And then, you know, then we can be transparent.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm just thrilled about this. So
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy. That was a really great question. Our next question will be from Ty. Ty, you should be able to unmute.
Thanks, Eleanor. Hey, Billy. Hey, Laya. Thanks so much for this conversation today. This was really fun. I like didn't know what the play was about, and then hearing that it was about a support group for family members who have died from embarrassing events was really interesting to me, because I wanted to ask, because this is interesting to me, like where that came from, like how that started germinating with you and with Greer, because I think, at least in my circles, we talk a lot about like Frank O'Hara, who was tragically killed very young by being hit by like a cab on Fire Island, basically. And like it was like misreported as a cab, but it was actually like a beach buggy, and it's like our hero, and it's like not a super honorable death. So I think about this kind of thing a lot, about how you can process grieving while also like talking, like that's like embarrassing. So yeah, I wanted to hear about how you kind of came up with that.
I mean, it's so funny because, yeah, I don't know if I thought of Frank O'Hara during the process at all, but I'm also aware of the strangeness of those circumstances. And then like, I mean, what's funny is like people after the show have kind of been like, you know, I know somebody who died in this way. And then somebody said, I forget the person's name. I think it's a woman author, the person who wrote Goodnight Moon. Apparently, and I have not fact checked this, but this was just shared with me. Apparently, like she was undergoing some, thank you, Margaret Wise Brown. Yes, she was undergoing some kind of surgery, and like a clot of some kind, or there was some kind of medical issue, and she went to the hospital and she was taken care of. And they were like, can you stand up? She was like, yes. And they were like, and how are you feeling after the procedure? She's like, I'm feeling great. And then she did like a high kick, and the clot like exploded, went to her brain, and she died. So it's just like, I think what we were also just trying to explore, and what the character of Hadia just kind of says, is like, it's all arbitrary. Like it's all kind of, it happens. And Hadia's outlook on the whole thing is like, what a gift to give somebody to go in such a tickling way. But the nuts and bolts of your question, Ty, Greer, my co-creator, approached me with the idea, and it was just so delicious. And I thought it would give way to like a cool theatrical experience. And I also think, and something that I think Greer and I had talked about was, like, I think, you know, I don't know if these are the end times per se, but like it always feels like it's the end time. But then I remind myself, I'm like bubonic plague, 2 world wars. Like I'm like, it's probably always been in some way the end time. And so I think that what's weighing on my conscious, and perhaps our collective conscious, is this like immense morbid pessimism. But at the same time, like we're looking for like maybe the wonky humor that is its neighbor. And it felt like this would be a way to explore that.
Amazing. Amazing question. And what a story. Wow. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Lily.
I've truly yet to fact check this, so I'm just taking it out. I will follow this up later.
Awesome. So will I, for sure. I have kind of a related question that I would like to ask you, Billy. Just more on if you could just kind of speak more to the choice to unite humor and grief, especially kind of during a time, as you alluded to, that is so full of grief. And I'm interested in how you see grief in proximity to humor and like their closeness, and yeah, just kind of more about that process and how it was.
Yeah. My mom just has like a really dark, sick sense of humor, and I think that it's just in me. At the same time, I mean, I will say, knock on wood, besides like a grandparent, I have really, my journey with loss, I think, is perhaps a milder one compared to people in the company, people who have seen the show. So I can't help but find the humor in it from my vantage point. I do think if something really terrible were to happen with me, that I would have a harder time with this show. We did have a critic come who may or may not write about it. And I know that this critic is somebody who lost a very close person in the last year. And I happened to be there that night and I was watching this person watch the show. And I don't know if it was an enjoyable experience for that person. And I think that that's the hard thing as well, about kind of what Jeremy was saying, like if you don't know what you're coming in for per se, but you also don't want to give it away. So I don't know. Like I do think that my outlook will always be kind of like a macabre sense of humor, but I say that with maybe a little privilege.
Totally. Thank you, Billy. And our next question is from Chloe.
Billy and Maya, thank you so, so much for this conversation, which has been such a joy to listen to. And thank you for making this work, Billy. I am wondering, you're halfway through showings of the work. What's been most surprising seeing it in situ in the space? And has anything come up that you didn't expect when you were writing it?
Oh, wow. I've sat now 2 or 3 times to see it. And what's just been really, really awesome is just seeing the actors' comfort with people around them and different people around them each night. And just having no expectations. I think as actors, especially in something that is a comedy, a dark comedy, but still, it can be hard to not get the payoff of a laugh or the satisfaction of it. And just them through the director's gentle guidance, like being told, just lean into the trust that these bizarre people are all in a space together, and you've built these characters, you've done the work, now just share it. But just finding them refine and just go deeper and in ways that are more truthful has just been really, really cool. And learning that some nights are quieter than others and some nights are more rowdy than others. And that's just been a lot of fun.
Thank you so much. I'll add in here a question that Jeremy just put in the chat, which is how much of it is improv?
None of it.
None of it.
Yeah, it is all very, very much scripted. Even the parts that I think people think are improv, like some of the actors turn to their neighbor and just kind of say something. Those are all scripted, and the actors make the choice to share that with their neighbor. The only thing that's really Ryan, the director, and I were kind of saying the show is kind of like 3 shows. You have the pre-show where the house is open for like 15 minutes before the show begins, and you have the actors milling about, doing some business, setting up, sharing cookies, putting tea out, and that feels like its own show. And that part is perhaps the most improvised, because if somebody talks to the actors, they engage in an appropriate manner. Then you have the show itself, and then you have the end of the show where it turns into a mystical dance of Zumba to Gloria by Laura Branigan. And then the actors are bowing during the dance, and it's clear that this is now a performance and it's done. And then the actors have to wait to go into the bathroom to change. So they just kind of talk with people, or people chat with each other. And it feels like that's like the 3rd show in this hour-long experience. So yeah, it's all scripted.
Thank you so much. Back over to you, Eleanor.
Awesome. Thank you so much again, Billy and Maya. This has just been incredible. And thanks to everyone who sent in questions today. Yeah, it's been such a joy. And thanks to the audience and everyone here in the NSE for tuning in today. We'd also like to thank the Terra Foundation for American Art for sponsoring our NSE program and for making these daily conversations possible, for their support of our archive, which you can view on the Rails YouTube channel, and where this conversation will be posted shortly. The Rail has been free and independent for 23 years. A donation directly supports our writers, production staff, and operations. So please consider supporting our work through the link that's going to be posted in the chat. And join us tomorrow at 1 p.m. for a conversation with Sunil Sansgary and Tausif Noor on the occasion of Sunil's exhibition at the Brooklyn Museum. Now you can all turn on your microphones and say hello and goodbye as you leave. Thank you so much for today. This was so wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you both
Thank
so
you
much.
so much.
Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, Billy.
Thanks
Thank
for
you,
this
Oh,
great
Laya.
Billy, that was
conversation.
amazing.
Thank you
That
so
was
much.
really fun.
Yeah.
Really fun. Thank you.
Good luck with the
Thank
rest of the
you.
shows.
Can't
Thank
wait.
Thank you for giving us the
Bye.
space.
Bye,
Thank you so
everybody.
much, everyone.
Congratulations on a good start.